talk a little bit today about some of the work with Death and the Powers, approaching it from a couple of different angles that we've seen so far. So thinking about what are the design and technologies of an opera that features robots and is billed as a robotic opera, but also some of the themes about machine and technology versus humanity that are being explored in this opera. Hail from the Media Lab here, seen here, which is a collection of many interdisciplinary groups, and our research group, Opera of the Future. The Death and the Powers is just one small corner. Some other things that we've done have been to use technologies to enhance virtuosic musicians, to put expressive capabilities in the hands of anyone, regardless of their musical training, whether it's young kids or the general public. Also using music and technology in healthcare contexts. We've done work in music and food pairings with the voice, massive collaborations, getting entire symphonies to collaborate with our PI of the group, Todd Mackover, in composing symphonic works, gesture, voice, all kinds of things. In 2010, however, we premiered an opera called Death and the Powers, and this began as an idea that Todd had reacting to the mediatization of theater as a form that most media incursions in theater took the form of projection and screens, and he wanted to explore the idea of physicalizing the mediated elements of the story and using that to enhance the storytelling and the understanding of music. The story took a number of different forms, and collaborators ultimately arriving with director Diane Paulus from Broadway, production designer Alex McDowell from Hollywood, poet laureate Robert Pinsky as the librettist, and Todd as the composer. So with that team, settled on this tale about Simon Powers, seated here in a wheelchair. And Simon Powers is a wealthy entrepreneur, inventor, and his life's work was to develop this system throughout his house. His health has been ailing, and he's very powerful, and he doesn't want to give up his agency in the world. He's like Bill Gates and Howard Hughes and Walt Disney combined, and he doesn't want to lose that, but he knows that he's mortal and he's dying. So the system that he's developed over the course of his life, in part with his adopted son, research assistant Nicholas, is his way of achieving some kind of immortality, some sort of agency, but not necessarily in his physical form. So he actually dies at the end of the first scene of the opera, disappears from the stage, and the entire theatrical set comes alive as this main character. And then it's how does his family, his third wife and his daughter from his first marriage, react to him in this new form, and how does the world at large, what does it mean, how does he change as he enters into this other realm of existence. So we have a set that is, in some sense, by some definitions, a robotic set. We have these three large walls which move about freely on stage as with displays in them. We have some smaller opera bots, we call them. We'll talk a bit more about them. This object hangs above, which is a chandelier, and from time to time, Simon Powers, in his new form, inhabits these different objects. He's represented through the physicality and the motion and the displays of light and image, and actually sound. We use two formats of spatialized surround sound in the hall too, to really just create this tangible sense of what's happening on stage and try to bring it off of the stage as well. The chandelier is one object that he inhabits, and it actually descends around his wife, widow, depending upon whether or not you think he's still alive. And they actually reminisce and have a very romantic encounter, shall we say, with the chandelier. And it actually turns out to be a musical instrument, so she can pluck the strings and strum them, and that's actually modifying his Simon Powers' voice. The robots themselves, so this inner narrative about Simon Powers is actually framed in a prologue and an epilogue by robots set in the distant future. And we begin the opera with seeing this massive robots awaken, and they break off from their cellular structure, and begin what we learn is a ritual pageant play that they have been programmed to perform to tell the story about the human characters, their human creators, but they don't understand this. So there's some hope, some legacy that has been imparted upon them in their programming to keep repeating this pageant play in hopes that they learn something about humanity. And they transform, 4 of them transform into the human characters. We have this download of image that represents the backstories, and they transform into the human characters, and then we're in the inner narrative. And inside the inner narrative, the robots function more as both extensions of Simon Powers when he's in the system, but also elements of furniture, scenic elements, control interfaces. They have a slightly more passive role. But overall, they're kind of like a Greek chorus. They can interact with the performers and thinking about the different types of control of robots that we just heard about. These guys run the gamut. We can talk about that in a bit. I'll just see a couple more seconds of them, how they react, how they perform. What does it mean for them to perform? They move about, they can extend, they have different channels of lighting in them, and the idea for that was to make them expressive. So they're vaguely humanoid, but we didn't want them to look humanoid. There were a number of different design objectives in what is this, the function that they serve in terms of the story. And the design evolved, of course, from these cube-like objects to the robots that we actually have in the production. It began with this idea of this physicality and creating a choreography of objects that somehow helps in the storytelling. And they actually then became robots in the context of the story. For the librettist, Robert Pinsky, he envisioned the robots as being these mysterious, elegant, and beautiful representations that extend beyond what we know. We also experimented with some other things there, types of movement. The director wanted them to be vaguely humanoid so we could relate to them as characters. The production designer wanted this idea of technological sophistication and that they could change from being subordinate to humans and then extending up to these superhuman sizes. And what they do, their function is to be, like I said, the Greek chorus. They're our reaction on what's happening in the show. And this, in the story, Simon Powers goes into the system and he's still able to, as he says, sign checks. He's still able to maintain his businesses and control his finances. But as he detaches from the material world, he becomes more apathetic. And the Nicholas character is very much a zealot of this idea and tries to persuade the other characters to join Simon in the system. And now Nicholas's backstory is that he was had some disfigurement or some birth defects, and Simon built these prostheses for him. So has something invested in the fact that technology is beneficial, and he actually sings a song commenting on the fallibility of his flesh and his mortal left arm, whereas his mechanical right arm is perpetual. It will live on. And we see this again with the robots, this idea that the robots are in this distant future and have outlived the human characters, and the technology is what persists. That's what Simon Powers wants to go into the system because he can go on forever. It's a form of immortality. But that begs a moral question. When you are immortal, do you have any sort of responsibility to those who are not? Those who are not as privileged, you have different classes start to form. Simon Powers goes into the system, he can still control his businesses, but then he stops caring about the physical world. He has no pain, there's no suffering inside the system. So why should he even care about the people in the physical world? So the world falls into ruin, war and famine, and these delegation from different agencies in the world come to implore him to not disregard the world, and then his daughter does as well. Meanwhile, Nicholas and Evie have gone into the system, and Simon, trying to convince his daughter Miranda, who he still loves, to come with him, takes this form of, reappears as a projection of the system to convince her, since she's not quite convinced whether this is still her father, because her father was, as quirky and eccentric and as much of a, to quote Pinsky, charismatic bully as he is, would not have let such harm come to all of the people of the world, such misery. So he tries to convince her to join him, and she argues in favor of humanity and for being able to touch and to feel and to suffer as being a part of her being, and does not follow him into the system. And this gets to the point that Pinsky wanted to do, to emphasize, is that technology is not the taker of souls. He didn't want to demonize the technology in the way that some portrayals of robots do. So he wanted the system to be grand and the robots to be elegant, and they're still morally neutral. What happens here, the choices that are made, are based on the human characters. And there's this idea of a machine, just to mention quickly, that Pinsky was also interested in, which, based on W.C. Williams' observation that a work of art is, if you think of robot being a worker, the work of art itself, the poetry in Pinsky's case, but the entirety of the production is a work that generates meaning. It's a creator of meaning. So I think that's an interesting thing for discussing in a very broad, abstract sense of what a robot or a work means. Robots get their own dressing rooms, just as a side note there. Designing these robots for performance is quite a challenge. We had to engineer them once we had to design. We did all this with the robots in-house in the Media Lab, constructed them. There's 12 of them in the production, figuring out how to control them. And they do run this gamut of, we developed control systems that allowed us to create keyframe animations and procedural animations, but they're also at times puppeteered by people with little Xbox controllers looking down from above, and part of that is for safety reasons. So it's this hybrid of different layers of control, and it varies over the course of the production as needed. Also, all the systems, the sound, the visuals, the robots, the lighting, everything is connected. There's 43 computers in the original production. And you think about just swapping out laptops here, getting 43 computers to do the same correct thing for the same 90 minutes it's a miracle, is what that is. But all these systems are connected, and the reason they do that is because at various times they all represent together in consort this character of Simon Powers. And when our baritone, who plays Simon Powers, that we see in the first scene, goes off stage, this is where that disembodied performance comes in. And this is a form of puppeteering that he's still performing. It's kind of different than a traditional puppeteer role, or what our controllers do with the Xbox controllers. He goes into the orchestra pit, and we outfit him with gestural sensors, a breath sensor, since breathing is a mark of good puppetry. And he's still singing, we still hear him, so we can analyze his voice and aspects of his voice, and from all of that, he's still singing and performing as if he were on stage. We just don't see his physical body. We look at the qualities of his movement, not necessarily what he's doing. It's not like motion capture. It's looking at the qualities, the expressive qualities, and trying to infer from that the emotional journey of that character. And then we translate that into the visuals, the sound, the movement of the robotics, which are deliberately these non-anthropomorphic abstractions. So it's not taking an arm and mapping it to an arm. It's taking a hesitant gesture or an emphatic gesture and mapping it to a hesitant gesture or an emphatic gesture. And because we like to think about how these experiences can, advance performance, advance theater, or create new ways of thinking about or creating theater. One of the things that we did in our most recent performance, I said we premiered in 2010. We played in Boston, in Monaco. We played in Boston and Chicago. And then this past February, we performed in Dallas. And one of the things we did with that is, because we had all these interconnected systems and we had a performer puppeteering them, we could take that data and actually send it to mobile devices. So we did a simulcast of a performance of the opera from Dallas to 9 cities around the world, and invited people to bring their mobile devices, installing an app that we created. And the performance is partially generated on their devices based on the data coming from that performer. So now we're not just controlling the theatrical set, we're giving you a little piece of the theatrical set in your hand, even if you're not in the theater. And other themes that we explored in this that we can talk about later is, why we would do that and what does it mean to be live and have a live performance that's distributed across space. And now we're also thinking about performances that are distributed across time, but we can create these different types of, and in some ways it's kind of like an extension of the robotic set, no matter where you are.